しよかったら明日も明後日も毎日ミュウに物語を聞かせて。
最強ってのはこんな感じなんだろうな。
Hello everyone. So I know it's been kind of silent on this channel for a couple weeks now. Part of that is because we're actually getting pretty close to releasing our new website for Wikigrisser. I know we've been saying that for a long time, but we've been doubling our efforts recently to get it out as soon as possible. And I've been going through some personal stuff myself, so I haven't had as much time to make videos, even though I would really like to. But let's put aside all that for a second and just talk about Mu and Epsilon here. Now for Global, this is actually going to be a pretty small major patch, because a lot of what was supposed to come out in this patch, they actually moved to the previous patch. Like for example, on the China server, this patch was the one that added the final chapters of the Act 2 story. So aside from the Secret Realm event, there isn't actually going to be a whole lot added this time, other than what you would usually expect from a major patch. And that serves my purposes pretty well, at least. It lets me try to keep this video kind of short, and hopefully you guys will be seeing that new site really soon. So before I go any further, I first want to talk about whether or not you should actually pull on this banner. So even if you're already familiar with these two characters, there are a couple pieces of information that I think you should consider before pulling. First, there is going to be a ELS Legends banner down the line, somewhere around January or February for us, that is going to be Sage of the Trees, Wiler, and Mu. So obviously if you already have Sage of the Trees and Wiler, and you don't plan on using Mu very soon, you just wanted to work on that as like a background project or something, you might want to wait until that banner to pull for her. Similar thing exists for Epsilon. Now as far as we know, Epsilon is not going to be getting any kind of Destiny banner anytime soon. He is however going to be getting a raid up, also around January or February next year, and this banner is going to be shared with Hilda. So Hilda is a pretty common 6-star character for a number of endgame players. So those of you who want Epsilon, not necessarily just to play Epsilon himself, but also because he will be unlocking some bonds down the line. Most notably, Alpha and Transcendent are going to need Epsilon for their bonds. So obviously based on this, you can decide a couple things. If you really want to use Alpha and Transcendent when they come along, you probably should pull for Epsilon now. But if you want to pull for them and maybe think you can wait for the bonds on them, you can of course pull for Epsilon later. Or if you just think, I want a second meteor buffer at some point, you can also wait for the Hilda plus Epsilon banner, so you don't have to deal with maybe pulling too many Mus. So with that out of the way, I guess I'll talk a little bit about Epsilon first. So the most notable thing about Epsilon is of course that he is the second meteor strike faction buffer after Zerda. Now generally speaking, I do think Zerda's buff is better in terms of general usage, because Zerda has a flat damage buff rather than just a crit and crit damage buff. And the after kill movement is usually more useful than Epsilon's buff, which is after kill you get some counterattack damage. But the most interesting thing about Epsilon's faction buff is the fact that it reduces the enemy's critical evasion rather than increasing your critical hit rate. This means that this faction buff allows you to negate, to some degree, the effects of things like Giant Resistance Armor, Landius's Aura, and the Crit Evasion Arena Mastery Stone. Many of the Meteor Strike characters are very reliant on getting that crit, and then there isn't a huge variety of ways to reduce enemy crit evasion as of right now, the most common way being using Faceless Assassins. But aside from that, Epsilon is actually kind of a generic assassin. He actually has lower range than even Zerda, who by this point is considered maybe above average range at best. So his striking range is actually considered kind of unimpressive compared to some other assassins, but he does have very high attack, which is always nice. He's also a one-range unit that increases his attack range and then attacks at range with melee soldiers. So he does use very different kinds of soldiers compared to typical assassins. He uses a lot of infantry soldiers, he's got heavy infantries, he's got cyborgs, he's got gargoyles, and he has bats if you're really so inclined, but bats really aren't that good for him. But what this means is that his kill target list is a little bit different than some of the other assassins. And of course having infantry as a pretty regular choice for his soldiers is nice when you want to corner an opponent who may be bringing Lancers because you picked something else, like say Werner. But of course the truth is that this is actually not going to be that relevant in the future, because now we do know that Epsilon is going to be getting an exclusive, expected to hit global sometime maybe around February. And of course I think this sword is perfectly worth factoring into whether or not you want to pull for Epsilon, because it is a pretty strong exclusive. So not only does this sword cause Epsilon to ignore all class effects, which basically makes him like Listel. This means you can run Epsilon in his demon class, which has 600 attack. Of course, keep in mind this does make him susceptible to Shelf and Heal stun, but that's still pretty good. And it has another effect that says whenever a unit dies, he will dispel 1 debuff, restore some HP, and then he will gain a shield that reduces damage by 80% for 1 attack. And as far as I can tell, this shield has no duration. Now this actually combines incredibly well with some of the more aggressive characters they've been adding, especially Wet Ham, who has been very centralizing, or at least very strong in the meta. When you combine this with the fact that Epsilon does have a 1C that allows him to become untargetable, it does help him a lot with his movement range problem. Not only can he take 1 turn where he can avoid a lot of enemy attacks outside of ground or self-target AoEs, but if you have other rush units that can run in and kill stuff first, that gives Epsilon a buff that enables him to be more effective. And like I said, they've added a couple units that sort of function that way already, including Weitam. And of course, the thing to remember about Epsilon is that he is a faction buffer, so having him as a dedicated follow-up type character isn't really a bad thing, because one of the main reasons you would put him in a box is to faction buff. So if you're a big Meteor Strike player, and if you're also a big Dark player, which has very nice crossover with Meteor Strike, Epsilon is definitely worth getting. And thanks to us knowing that he has this really strong exclusive down the line, I do think it is worth pulling if you are big on those factions. I actually think a Legend faction can skip on Epsilon, and one reason I would say that is because I cannot 100% confirm this because I haven't tested with Epsilon, but when you use characters like Listel with Landius's faction buff, Landius's faction buff actually does not work with Listel because for some reason the game thinks that if you disable class effects you can't activate the special effect on Landius's faction buff. At least that's how it works in the game right now, and I don't know if this is an oversight or something, but if Epsilon's sword works the same way, then that means Landius's faction buff actually really sucks for Epsilon. But yeah, that's all I gotta say about Epsilon. You know, not a crazy character, but is a faction buffer, which is always valuable, and has enough of an interesting kit to make him a very interesting option. So next, I'll talk a little bit about Mu. So one look at Mu's kit does tell you very much about what she's supposed to be. She is one of those forest-based characters, which means she is one of those characters with a very low floor, but also a very high ceiling. So kind of similar to Illustrial, a lot of what makes or breaks her is the map that you are getting. So her talent essentially gives a free attack command and free passive healing to every single unit you have on the map as long as they end their turn on grass or forest. She also debuffs enemies that end terrain on grass or forest. So if you're on the right map, just for standing there, Mu can be very annoying. So aside from that, she does have a number of support skills, but the most notable one, probably the most important one, is the fact that she has a teleport that teleports 1 target unit to any forest or grassland tile on the map. Now, the range on the teleport is 3. You can only cast it on someone up to 3 spaces away, but indeed, the spot you can teleport to is anywhere on the map, as long as it has a grass or forest. I don't think I need to explain just how powerful this can be on the right maps. Now, as far as I know, this actually does not work on things like Deedlit or Lambda, so you can't send Deedlit forward and then use Mu to teleport someone next to Deedlit. So you aren't really given the option to manipulate it, even on maps where it might not work. Now, aside from a teleport and some passive healing, Mu is mostly just an attack mage, a supporting attack mage. She's got some attack spells and some AoEs, but the most notable one is her 3C. It does 1.6 times damage, which is nice, but it's not the most important thing. The most interesting thing about this skill is the fact that it debuffs the enemy with a special debuff that makes it so that when they die, they become a Treant summon. This Treant summon guards your units as long as the Treant itself is on a grassland or forest. And it actually has one of those like forest guard skills that you see on Treants as enemy NPCs, where they place themselves on terrain. So of course this is always nice to have in PvP. People who have used Sissy White before will know a disposable tank can mean a difference between defeat and victory sometimes. And of course if you're using Mu in a more aggressive strategy, sometimes just having that unit there that can take a hit, save all your units for that 1 extra turn, sometimes that's enough to turn the tide. So this is actually a very strong 3C. The problem of course is that you need to either kill with the skill, or you need to tag it onto something and then kill them soon after. Now Mu herself only has 3 move and doesn't really have any way to increase it. So Mu getting to the front lines to hit something in the first place is also a problem. But even with all these limitations, Mu is a very strong unit on any grassland or forest heavy map, and that pretty much makes her a prime candidate for the side box in Apex. Just like Illustrial, sometimes in playoffs, if you see that mountainous or forest heavy map, you can bring out Mu and bring Illustrial as well. There will both be very huge pressures on your opponent during pick ban, if nothing else. So just to go over the 3Cs real quick, I think we all know which one everybody has been looking forward to, but it's definitely not Silverwolf's. Silverwolf's 3C gives him a bunch of buffs before battle to try to help him activate his helm, I guess, which allows him to strike first if he has 2 or more buffs more than the opponent. A lot of times SRs are completely playing catch up, and this is really one of those cases. I mean, there are so many assassins now that have all these crazy effects, or even first strike. Kirikaze getting first strike really doesn't help him all that much. His biggest problem is that he can't keep up with the movement power creep that's been going on in the game, and this really doesn't do anything to fix that. It does give him movement +1 before entering battle, so before using it, which I'm pretty sure they're just like mocking us with that. I mean, it's an okay attack, it's just that why would you do this? So another one is Kirikaze. Like I said, SRs are often playing catch up in the realm of PvP, but at least Kirikaze has always had a place in PvE, especially for newer players. He's a great Thunder Dragon killer. He can still get top scores on Jormungandr. So this 3C has a passive portion that reduces the physical damage he takes as long as his skill is higher. This only works in battle, so it's not going to be useful for Jormungandr runs, since the main thing that kills you in that fight is the AoEs that boss does. But this is nice for killing Thunder Dragon, and it's also nice for some challenge runs where you might not have that many infantry to choose from. You can always choose Kirikaze. He's always been a pretty frail character, so adding some tankiness to him can be very useful. The attack portion is basically just a stronger air slash. It does have a longer cooldown, which sometimes is a huge downside in PvE, but since Kirikaze can potentially just spam flash every single turn, as long as you crit properly, it's actually not so bad to replace air slash with this thing. So overall, it's nothing revolutionary. In terms of objective quote-unquote quality, it really isn't that much better than Silverwolf's 3C. But what makes it more useful is the fact that Kirikaze does get some PvE use, and assassins like Silverwolf usually don't. So Bozel 3C, okay, what do I gotta say? So it's a self-target 5-span AoE that has 0 cooldown, but the cooldown goes up by 1 each time you use it. So because of this, if you bring this 3C alongside Black Hole and Seal, it means you get to do Bozel's 3C, and since it's 0 cooldown, you get to do 3C again, to have 1 cooldown, and then you can cast Black Hole, and then you can cast 3C again. And then after that, the 3C will have 2 cooldown. It also allows him to continue being a faction buffer, while bringing the 3C instead of Black Hole plus Earthquake. You can just have the 3C with Seal, which is always a very powerful passive. But of course, the most notable thing about this 3C is the fact that it allows Bozel to move off Clock Enchant if you can afford it. It used to be that Bozel can only run 3 or 4 blocks, depending on if he had boots or not, and then cast Black Hole from up to 3 spaces away. Well, that is a thing of the past. You can now enchant Bozel with Breeze, and even without Breeze, he can move 3 and then have 5 striking range. But the ability to move the Breeze instead of Clock is a pretty significant change for him. It's definitely very nice in his fast-paced meta, and Bozel is always valuable to have in a box because he is a faction buffer, and there's always a lot of relevant, very strong Dark Faction units. Bozel is the perennial villain of Wikigrisser. He's appeared in basically all the games, so I guess you could say he kind of deserves it. And Bozel is a character that a lot of players will build, even if you didn't get the free Bozel way back. He is a character that runs pretty often on repeat banners, and he's a pretty useful build for PvE, so it's nice that they make Bozel continuously relevant, especially since newer players who want to jump into PvP should try to be more AoE focused and try to make use of their SR or common SSR characters, such as Bozel. Anyway, I think Bozel's 3C is mostly pretty self-explanatory. So next, let's talk a little bit about these exclusives. Neither one of them is particularly important, but I will say that Florentia's is probably slightly better than Wiler's. Wiler's just feels like kind of a waste to me. It's not a bad helm or anything, but it's pretty common for Wiler to be wearing Bracer already anyway, so the below 50% HP immune to fixed damage effect is really only useful if you weren't already wearing Bracer on Wiler, which is kind of common. It helps you survive Ares' second AoE, it helps you survive fixed damage terrain or some kind of poison effect you might have after using Wiler's 3C. But generally speaking, I don't think it's really all that useful. The 50% chance to reduce cooldown by 2 is pretty weak in my opinion. I would have much preferred that it just reduced cooldown by 1 all the time, because that way Wiler would be able to spam mass heal over and over. there's really no reason to be running Wiler as a mass heal bot when Licorice exists now. This cooldown reduction is also obviously useless for things like his 3C. The cooldown on that is way too long. It might be nice to get a cooldown reduction on regroup or tactical retreats, but a coin flip chance is never something we really want to bet on, so this is kind of a bad helm just from the consistency argument. So everyone has Florentia's. Soldier damage taken minus 10% is actually very nice for Florentia. Florentia's soldiers can get pretty tanky, especially at 100% life. The extra battle strategy at the start of a fight doesn't necessarily help that much. It is, however, very useful if you have a 5-star Florentia, because then this helm basically makes her function similar to a 6-star Florentia. Getting battle strategies when an ally dies can also be useful, but only in late game. And that can still happen. Florentia is a healer that is used even in rush boxes. So overall, I do think Florentia's helm is worth getting. Although for both of these, of course, you are always having them compete against Tenyo's Headdress, which of course is a very, very powerful helm. For Wiler at least, I don't think the helm is all that worth it, unless you do not use fixed immune equipment on Wiler and you expect to be taking like an Ares AoE all the time or something. So overall, these are both decent to good helms, but Tenyo's Headdress exists, and that is still really, really OP. Aside from that, there actually wasn't a whole lot added this patch other than a Secret Realm event, and as always, I will be covering that. I'll be doing the challenges when I can. But for now, that's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much for continuing to watch this show. And like I said earlier, we're getting pretty close to releasing our new website, so hopefully we can have that up in a few weeks. And hopefully I can find some time to start making some more videos as well. Good luck on your polls, everyone.